Hi there, and welcome to the Curious Collective podcast, conversations designed for the conscious community to bring awareness to those holistic practices to help you live your best life. So tap into the wisdom and knowledge of our guests to help you heal, transform, and live as your true soulful self. I am blessed here to have with us today the beautiful Paige Haynes. Welcome. So,
Thank you very much.
Paige and I have known each other now for probably about 3 years, but it seems like a heck of a lot longer. So we actually met each other through a phone call out of the blue when I was doing a workshop at the RSL once. I'm like, oh, who's this? Answered my phone and chatted to Paige, and she'd rung to connect with me around veterans with PTSD to help one of her clients because she'd heard that that was the work that I was in. So I think our 5-minute phone call turned into an hour-long phone call where we both had to leave because we had to get our kids from school. So welcome, Paige. It's so beautiful to have you here on the call. Can you introduce yourself? Because you'll do a much better job of it than me.
I don't know about that, but hi, I'm Paige. Yes, thank you so much for having me. And wow, where to start? First and foremost, I'm a mum. I've got 3 boys. They are 6, 10, and 12, and we've just taken that to a whole new level with some homeschooling. So that's kind of part of my identity, I guess, at the moment. Above and beyond that, though, I am a kinesiologist and I teach neurolinguistic kinesiology. And I also work with bioresonance. I am an NLP practitioner also and master practitioner, and a holistic health coach. So
Oh, yes. What a beautiful combination all of those are.
yeah, it is actually. I was just saying before, actually, everything's just starting to drop in at the moment. And it's like, how am I going to pull all of this together, in a way that's going to be best for me, I guess, in my lifestyle now and, the kids and things. I'm so sorry. My children have just bounded up the stairs, so if you can hear them in the background.
We don't mind at all. So can you tell us, before we dive into how you got to doing what you're doing now, what is kinesiology? Because we haven't actually had a kinesiologist on any of our calls yet.
Ah, beautiful. Kinesiology. Well, it's amazing. Basically, the way I usually describe it to people is we use a tool called muscle testing. And the muscle testing gives us an access to the subconscious mind. So it's a way to bypass the conscious mind and access the subconscious mind. And then the tools that we use beyond that within kinesiology, we look at different ways that we can support the body, both chemically, or we call it electrically as well, within the body. So we're looking also at the emotional, we look at the structural, we look at the spiritual, and then with my own one, we sort of look at the NLP and the environment. So I guess it's a holistic approach, but we're using the person's body to ask questions and to find out where the stress lies. And so often those questions are actually done internally by the practitioner. So the client doesn't even know what we're asking, which means that we can guide, their body's just guiding us through that muscle testing. So a muscle test will show you a stress or when something's not a stress. And so that can kind of lead the path to where we need to go and which corrections. And they can be things like chakra balancing, or in the structural we do things that actually realign the muscles or release muscles, or strengthen muscles if that's what's needed. In the environmental, we can check about food and supplements and language and lifestyle and all of those types of things. And in the emotional, we have a few amazing tools that we can do to release emotional things that are sitting there as well. So yeah, it's pretty comprehensive, and I think it's so great because it does look at that complete picture, because we're not just it's not always just one thing. And I find particularly that the emotional is just always behind any of the physicals. So when someone comes to me, if they're looking more for that structural kind of because that's kind of what people have in their mind with kinesiology. A lot of time they've been to a chiropractor where they've done the testing. Sorry, or
all the ologies.
Yeah, right. And so they sort of think it's just, I'm going to get you on the table and just all these structural kind of things. And so I'm always, if someone comes to me, it's the first time, I really stress that I work more in that spiritual and emotional realm, because when you really look beyond, into that it's always sitting behind the physical issue, in my experience anyway. So that's tend to be who I attract to me, as well as people who are willing to look at that and to start to release that. But the beautiful thing about kinesiology is too, you don't have to talk about it. So if you've got, deep trauma and things like that you don't want to go and touch, because we don't have to verbalize everything, you don't actually have to relive any of that. So the body can release that without you even needing to acknowledge it necessarily.
Yeah. It's like you're a deep level body communicator. You're talking to the body and the body's talking to you.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I guess my place, because I teach now, I love empowering people with the tools. And so I probably talk a little bit too much in my sessions, because I like telling people all the stuff that's coming up, and I like to pass on tools that they can then go home and use. I'm not your typical come back every week. I'm actually joke that I'm a bad business model, because I'm a commitment phobe. I don't want someone coming back to me every week. I want to get in there, get deep with them, and then send them on their way and have them have tools that they can actually use for their own health and healing.
I love that. And you know what? To me, I hear the word catalyst, because you could be, if that person's never tried that before and they've come to you for the first time, or one of your students, because you teach it now, it's like that person's opening the door for them to then go on and explore further their emotional body and their spiritual body and all of the things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's kind of how I view it. I'm just there to hold their hand for a little bit on their journey, and hopefully they go on, and are able to be that for themselves, or whatever the next step is for them as well. So
and I love practitioners like you, because I'm one of those people that goes in and I like to know, oh, what did that say? What did my body say? Like, I get really curious. Some people I know, and some of my friends, I'm like, but what did they say at the end of the session? They're like, they didn't say anything. I'm like, but did you ask?
Well, I know for me, one of my first experiences with kinesiology was that they didn't tell me anything, and they were just like, doing the muscle testing. I'm doing this because that's kind of what muscle testing looks like to people. And then they would say all these things to me, and I was like, but how do you know? So they didn't explain it very well. So I probably am an over explainer now, because I feel like I could have come to kinesiology a lot earlier had I really understood the basics behind it, So for me, and that's what I always stress to my students too. It's like, let's explain this. Let's make sure people understand what we're doing, and, that type of thing. So
I think it's so important, again, because then people can go away and maybe integrate some of the tools you've given them, or, go and explore further. So absolutely beautiful. And you also mentioned that you teach. So you're teaching people how to become kinesiologists.
That's right. Yeah. So
awesome.
I've studied a few different types of kinesiology, but the one that really resonated with me was a combination of NLP and kinesiology. So it's called Neurolinguistic Kinesiology. And I guess it resonated for me because I found that initially with the work that I was doing, I'd ask a few quick questions, and then I'd get the person on the table, and they would kind of zone out, and they wouldn't necessarily have a self-responsibility model there.
Yeah.
And they were looking for me to heal them. And with the neurolinguistic kinesiology, we are really diving deep, and we're asking questions, and we're using that NLP, those NLP skills, to help the person understand what the underlying things are and how they may be, so it's that, at cause rather than at effect. So it takes it away from being that victim into that, I have control of my life, I'm empowered, I can make these changes, and these changes will, impact on me. So so that's sort of what I found that within the neurolinguistic kinesiology, and I went, okay, I think, and actually I wasn't thinking about studying it at all, but my teacher came to me and said, I think you need to go and do this. And I was like, really?
Oh, I love that.
She's like, yeah, you do. I'm like, oh, okay then. So
I feel like that adds that extra depth, that extra layer with it. And I love how you mentioned it as the cause and effect too, is so many people can stay stuck even after they've come to have a session with you, because then or someone that's not going deep with them, because then they're like, oh, that was really great. And then they just slip back into that same pattern or that same belief system or that same thing that's keeping it locked.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we need to get to understand what's underneath it, So a quick example is I had a client once, and a psychologist, actually, his psychologist referred him to me because he had this back pain, but she said to him, don't go to Paige until your work cover is sorted, your case is sorted, because you're not going to heal until that happens. Because he had a vested interest in being sick at that point.
Yeah.
Right. And he needed to clear that before he could actually clear his physical thing. So he walked in limping. He had a really bad back issue. And when we discovered what was going on, he didn't like his job. He didn't want to be there. So he beautifully manifested an accident in where he couldn't work because he was so badly injured. And he got up off the couch and walked out straight as anything. As he walked out, I was like, what? I just said to him, how's your back? And he's like, oh, good.
Wow.
Have a good life. You know, like, so we shifted it because we got to the point where it's like, okay, this is, you know, and he took ownership for that. And he's like, yeah, I can see how that would happen. And now I'm ready to move on with my life. So I can heal from this now. I don't need to be stuck in that anymore.
Oh, wow. That's super
It's really
powerful.
cool. Oh, it's huge. Yeah. And, you know, that's just one story of many. And once you get to that lower levels, it's like, okay, you know that you've actually created this, you know, and that's not to put blame on people or shame people or any of that. It's just simply to understand that you know, there are things that are keeping you stuck in there.
And sometimes that's part of their experience here in this life is to feel that pain or that grief or that sadness or that whatever, and to work through that as part of the human experience.
100%. Yeah, definitely.
And you are now beautifully combining the work you do in teaching kinesiology to people with bioresonance. That's exciting. Can you tell us more about bioresonance?
Yeah. I began my bioresonance journey it's probably nearly 3 years ago now. Can't think, maybe 2.5 years ago. Well, actually, no, that's not quite true. I worked with frequency. My very first modality, which I didn't mention before, is called reconnective healing. And so that is tapping into the body's energy field and working with frequency. And so there's been a number of different tests done over time where you can actually see the light coming. I think it's Popov or something. His name's Alexander Popov, I think it is. And you can actually see that where they've done tests where they can see the light coming out of people's hands when they're activated. Awesome. It's amazing. It's beautiful. And so they did, you know, the modality that I did, they did a lot of tests on that, and you could see, you know, all of that happening. I was actually healed with that. So I had an ongoing issue that wasn't shifting, and I was really aware of the emotion thing underneath it and everything. And I'd done a lot of work on that, but it still wasn't shifting. And so I had a session with a practitioner, and it was just a demonstration. And I put my hand up and she chose me, and that issue stopped that night. Yeah, it was amazing. And I'd been told by doctors I'd never have children. Like, that's how severe that issue was. And, you know, it was, pretty full on. It was impacting on my life in a big way. Yeah. So I was like, right, being me, I'm going to go and study that. And so that was my introduction into the healing world. So I started with frequency and understanding strings and strands and all of that type of thing in the body, the energetic body, I guess, the frequent, and that we emit a frequency. And so that work, I would work over the body, not on the body. And I would tap into the different frequencies in the body. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Did a lot of distance work with people. So, you know, all over the world, where I would just lay down and feel, you know, the frequencies in my body, and they would feel them as well. And I would know where.
That fascinates me.
Oh, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of Reiki practitioners do the distance Reiki and all of that. So I guess I was in a really great position when, this technology started to come out. I had one of my students had a big machine. I can't remember which brand it was, but it, you know, cost her $15,000. And I was like, and I remember as clear as day, it must have been the January. And I think this was presented to me literally 4 weeks after I said it, but I was like, how awesome would this be if this could be made available, you know, as something that everybody could use, you know, and
like an iPod.
Yes. 100%. And it wasn't $15,000, you know, a personalized device. And literally my first technology came out and I was like, oh my gosh. So So I had a series of experiences with that because I need to find, we talked about being a 3-5
Yes.
in human design. So both Katie and myself are 3-5. I need to have the experience to then be able to work with things. And so I had an experience with that particular technology where I had a little girl that I'd been working with, and she'd seen osteos and physios and this, that, and the other. I had a deep feeling that it was still a lot more emotional work we needed to do for her to fix it, but it was her foot and she wasn't, it wasn't working. Anyway, and I said to her mom, because she was coming for a session with me, and her mother had spent hundreds of dollars, and I was just like close to 1,000, I think, by this stage to get her child walking properly again, basically.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, why don't you just pop in? Because I'm experimenting with this new thing, and I don't know whether I'm, going to do it yet, but I need some bodies to work on. And I know that I knew her issue, And so she came, and 40 minutes later she walked out, and the pain
So
never
good.
came back.
Goosies.
I know, right? So I was like sold. I knew it worked. And from then on, I just had, testimonial after testimonial. That initial technology, I felt a few roadblocks with, and I got to a point where it was like, it wasn't quite what I was wanting.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to train people. I wanted to be able to support people, and it just wasn't providing that for me. So then, of course, the next layer came
Thank
through.
you, universe.
Exactly right. And it was quite funny because another student introduced this to me, and I was like, no, I don't need another bioresonance. Thanks. I've got mine.
Yeah.
And I had 3 of these other ones, right? So I was like, no, I don't need anything else. Anyway, she kept bringing me along to show the other students and secretly to show me because she knew I'd love it.
Well done.
She's showing me these reports, and I was like, oh, hang on. This is what I've been looking for, because I love the detail, and I love being able to provide the detail to the people who detail. And I could really see how I could sink my teeth into it. And so that's where I landed with this particular technology. And yeah, it's just blowing my mind every day. I was just joking with you before, Katie, because I've got the 3 boys. And so one of my sons has had some back pain issues, and I've taken him, he's had kinesiology, not with me. Well, actually I have done a little bit with him, but I've given him to my students because it's sometimes better for your kids to work with someone else. He's been to a Byron therapist. He's been to 2 chiros. He's where else? Oh, we've gone and had an X-ray because we thought maybe it's, the bone. I have been running body scans on him, but I haven't been running, there's a subtle energy frequency imprinter, it's called. And so you can do a playlist. So this morning I'm like, you know what? This is ridiculous. I have not been using this on him. So I started running it. And 5 minutes later, he came out to me, I kid you not, it's like, oh, Mum, my back feels really good today. And I literally, the last 2 weeks, every morning I'm saying to him, how are you feeling, mate? Like, how's your back today? And he's like, oh, it's terrible. Poor me. And then this morning, yeah.
How wonderful. I wonder what it shifted in there for him. It's amazing that this device can get in and do that so quickly. And you've told me many stories about, you could have testimonies for days about things that this has done for people within your life. Even your husband, I remember at one stage you were working with him on something, and it was 2 sessions and he was fixed. And I'm like, oh, brilliant.
Yeah, it's insane. And, sometimes it's just about, it can be overcomplicating things, because this is part of the problem with this technology. It's so much information that you sometimes feel like you need to be an expert, which isn't the case. It's, you can just use it on its very basic levels. And I think that I was trying to overcomplicate it. I was running the body scans and trying to work out which vertebrae it might be, and this and that and the other. And then it's like, you know what, just let that go and run the bloody back pain Cephi and just do that.
Let it
That's
trust
what
the
works
technology. Trust it.
That's it. Trust it. Just let it do its thing, and it will cover, it'll cover whatever it needs to cover, and it has. So that's been beautiful. And
So when you ran that back pain one for your son, is there a set frequency into the device that targets that particular area of the body?
Yeah. So I can read you the list. So basically, I guess to backtrack a little bit, everything has a frequency. Okay, so all of our blood cells, all of our, every part of our body, every inanimate object, every rock, everything vibrates at a certain frequency. And so we put out a frequency, and we can receive frequency as well. So these technologies are basically reading our frequencies in different areas, and they know what the optimum frequency should be, for example, for a blood cell. Okay, and what levels of things should be in that blood cell. And if your blood cells are not reading that, then it will give you a reading back saying it's not in coherence, I guess, with that frequency. And so, and then in terms of the subtle energy frequency, which is what I'm working with now, it's a scalar frequency. So it sort of moves across all time and space. So he's not sitting by this device. He's not connected to the device. It's literally got an energetics imprint of him, or signature of him, knows who he is through, you know, his date of birth, the fact that he's my son, you know, which is in there, the fact that he, you know, it's got his picture in there, it's got his date of birth, blah, blah, blah. So it's, and his height, weight, all of those things. So literally I've run energetic clearing for him, which I actually suspect that might be what's done it. Health, strength and recovery, back pain, back stiff, cerebral spinal problems, neck, nerve inflammation. I suspect there might be some arthritis. So I've run rheumatoid arthritis, and I've also put ultimate emotions in there.
Yeah.
Because I do feel like there's and so it's a playlist essentially of frequencies that he doesn't have to listen to, that he doesn't have to, you know, he doesn't even know I'm running it. And when he said this morning that he was feeling better, I'm like,
yay, that was me.
Yeah. So yeah, but yeah, so I'm just like, that's it. And that's just running in the background. And, you know, I do muscle testing so I can check how long he needs that for. But even if you go over that, generally the body will just reject it. Like if it's had enough, it'll have enough and that'll be okay. The only thing I'll say is that you do need to be hydrated. So, you know, just making sure if you are running an extended period for the frequencies that you're well hydrated or your person's well hydrated.
Because those beautiful plumpy hydrated cells integrate frequency better.
Much better. That's right. Exactly. And hydration is one of our, you know, my son and I both suffer from dehydration, you know, headaches and things like that if we're not hydrated enough. So I am quite particular with him and making sure. But
and I love it. I've also used both of these beautiful technologies and that you've introduced me to actually. And I know that when I'm using them and running them for myself and staying hydrated, like my frequency of going to the toilet is quite high because it's detoxing out what I don't need. It's flushing the cells, it's purifying the body. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so how did you get to doing what you're doing now? You didn't always sort of work with kinesiology and frequency. How did you get on this path?
That's a good question. I was an engineer actually. So I used to, I was a civil engineer. I was working and living over in London. And I kind of went through a bit of a crisis, I guess. I'd been sort of very shut off to my own emotional state. I had some trauma at about age 16 and I'd kind of buried it, as we tend to do, and hadn't dealt with it. And I tried to a couple of times see a counselor and, you know, open Pandora's box, but it just, I just didn't have the capacity to do it at that time. Yeah. And so I was always really interested in health and stuff. Mum was always juicing when I was younger, and my auntie passed away unfortunately when I was about in my teens, and but she dealt with her cancer naturally, and so they were off all over the world trying to find, you know, healers for her. And I so wish she was alive in these days because it never would have gotten to where it did. But she found that when they finally made her go on chemo and radiation, it doubled the size of her cancer every day. And so it kind of finished her off, unfortunately. But, you know, she was doing the saunas and the, you know, all of the amazing things and the juicing and the Pritikin diet and this and that. And she like, so I grew up around that. So health was always important to me. Anyway, so yeah, my body kind of hit a wall over in London and I'd been abusing it. I'd been, you know,
partying,
living the life, let's just say, for a lot of years. And I went to see a nutritionalist, but he was also a bit of an energy worker, a bit psychic, bit, you know, he was recommended to me from a friend. And so he just took one look at me and said, look, it's not anything to do with the food you're eating. It's all emotional. And so he referred me to an emotional freedom technique lady. So
I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so she was working on Harley Street. So I don't know if you know anything about London, but Harley Street is the big specialist center, like where all the doctors, the specialists and things are. So for her to be actually on Harley Street, I was like, this is a bit weird. So I went along, and back in that day, I paid 90 quid, which was actually quite expensive.
Wow. Yeah, it would have been.
And I saw her 3 times, and in those 3 sessions, about 2 minutes in, I was bawling my eyes out, and she had the whole blubbering mess story, and she shifted a lot in me. But it got me to the stage where I was like, okay, I need to actually go home and face my demons now. And I knew I couldn't do that in London without my family and the support that I needed to work through it. So I was called back. And so I did a bit of a trip through India, which was beautiful in terms of,
Nice.
helping me, reconnect, I guess, to myself a bit.
Mhm.
And then came home, and I used to work in engineering with a friend who, in the years that I'd been away, she shares the same birth date as me, and we're just always connected. And she was quite a light worker herself. And I let her know my story a bit, and she said, okay, I've got someone you need to see. So she worked with me, but also another healer. So he did a lot of sexuality healing with me.
Yeah.
And so that kind of opened the door. And then through that process, my body was having this kind of grieving thing, which was the thing that the doctor had said, you're not going to have kids and all of this sort of stuff. So at that stage, I was really aware of the underlying emotional, and I'm like, but I've got to shift this stuff, and that's when reconnective healing dropped in. And so I, at that point, I think I was working part-time, because I'd stepped away from, I was still doing the engineering, but just part-time, because I knew that provided me enough. So I started to transition into the healing work. And then after I'd shifted a heap of stuff, my soul partner dropped in, and then we very quickly kind of had kids and everything. So along that process, I learned, I sort of got to a point with my reconnective healing where it wasn't enough information, and I was like, oh, I need more. I'm a bit nosier than what it allows me to be, because we really weren't meant to ask questions in that. It was just sort of people come in.
Gosh, I wouldn't survive.
I know. And so, I'd literally do sometimes 3 sessions, sometimes just 1, and I'd never hear from the people again. Or, I'd just check in and they're like, yeah, good, thanks, done. And I'm like, oh, hang on, I want to know more.
And I want to create a little community. Come back.
Yeah, that was it. And so I actually started an organic food business locally, because we didn't have anything out this way, because I live at Tamborine. Well, it was Jimboomba at that point, but so that started to build a community around me. And I was transitioning so it all just kind of evolved. And then the kinesiology popped up, and it was something I couldn't refuse. So I started my studies, and then just went, this is what I need to be doing, kind of things.
I love that your own healing journey took you on all these synchronous paths of, oh, you need to chat to this person, or, oh, go see this person. And you knew, yes, okay, that feels good. I'm going to do that. And as a 3-5, are you sacral authority as well?
Yeah, I'm sacral.
We just know, like, is this what I need to do? Yes. Okay. Should I speak to Paige? Yes. It's so good.
It is good when you can shift the layers, because I find with the human design stuff, you have to really, that's our perfect blueprint, right? But there's layers of, different things that have been put on top of that too, so you have to kind of peel back the layers and and when you can sit in that perfect, well, not perfect, but when you can sit in that truth of clarity. And the clarity, that definitely works.
Oh, I love all that you've shared here with us today. I would just love to ask you if you had any advice for the listeners, if they wanted to explore the kinesiology, the NLP, the bioresonance, any of that more, what advice would you have for people?
I think just exactly that, follow your gut and just see what resonates for you. It may not be that I'm the right person for you to, connect with, but just have a look around and see what resonates with you about that. I'm more than happy to have a chat to anyone about any of it. So you can reach out at any time, but I will also let you know what the options are out there as well, particularly in the kinesiology world, because there's a lot of different ways you can go to study kinesiology. And same with NLP. Oh my gosh, there's so many different places you can go with NLP. But I'm more than happy to have a chat. I just think, follow. I feel like for me, being who I am, following, that gut instinct and who resonates, because that hasn't always been clear. And so I have, I've followed some things that weren't particularly right or didn't work for me. And so just getting a good feel, and you can do that by listening to people. Most people have got YouTube and, those different things. So just go on and actually explore it. A lot of places, with the study thing, will offer a free intro kind of thing, so you can go along and get a look and feel for the person. And I feel like that's the best option, and make sure they resonate, because even they might be the best in their field, but they don't resonate with your energy, or you don't resonate with them, So,
and there's nothing worse than committing to something quite significant and then getting 2 weeks in and going, oh, like, and listening to
Quite
that
right.
person, oh. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
nothing. So yeah, be really sure. And I have worked with you before, Paige, and I love the way that you operate because you speak to my need to know things and my curiosity. So thank you for being you. Thank you for joining us here on this podcast. And
Thank you for being you.
yeah, thank you. Anyone that wants to reach out to Paige, any of the blurbs under any of the places this is posted for the Curious Collective podcast, you will be able to reach out to her. So thank you, Paige, for
Thank you
joining
very
us.
much. No problems at all.
Bye, listeners.